Hey, welcome to Gold Creek Online. We're so grateful that you're joining us today. Hey, we just wanted to remind you that we have Connect groups coming up here. And if you want more information on that, go ahead and text Connect to this number that's on your screen. We would love to give you more information of how you can get connected into a small group. And we also wanted to make it aware today. We talk about giving a lot, but the reason we do that is because we can see the expansion of God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. And part of giving here, not only does it impact our community here in Lake Stevens, but it also can impact our world globally through one of our partnerships we have with Convoy of Hope. Go ahead and check out a video here of what they do that we provide to.
Hurricane Francine came through a couple of days ago. We had 100-mile-an-hour winds coming through my house for a few hours, and so it was rattling and whistling. It's scary because you don't know, and for a hurricane, you don't know what it's going to bring. Here we are today, able to set up and to serve our community with some bare essentials, just to be able to get them through till all electricity is back on.
Everybody has spent extra money that they didn't have on fuel and gasoline for generators and everything else. So any little helping hand like this just helps out everybody. You can see how many people are coming by and spending time waiting in line to get that extra little help. So we really appreciate this whole effort to help our people in our area.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience that this is a lifeline to hope. Convoy of Hope couldn't have been named anything better, because that's what it does. It brings hope into our communities, into all these communities. The one thing I knew I could depend on was that Convoy of Hope was going to be here. And so our community knows if there's a hurricane, there's a natural disaster, that they can come to this parking lot and there's going to be someone here who's going to help them. But we can only do that because Convoy gives us what we need to make that happen. Thank y'all so much.
Yeah, so if you've never taken that next step in giving some of your finances to the Lord, we want to encourage you to take that next step in your life by texting the number here on your screen. Text them GIVE, or use one of these other options that are also available to you via the app or on our website. We really want to encourage you to see how life change can take place through you giving to the Lord here at Gold Creek. And hey, we're going to finish up our sermon series today of School. That's our final sermon in that series. Let's look forward to what James has to say to us today.
Hey guys, welcome. Last week, this is it. This is our final week of school, week 4. We're in this series that just kind of talks about finding lessons when life gets hard, and today is no different. And what does it mean to be a good person? And we're going to jump into all of that. But before we did, I wanted to think about or talk about the concept of how do you know if you're a good person or not? And a few years ago, I had this discussion with someone, and we were just talking about spirituality and God, and they used to be a follower of Christ, but then they've kind of fallen away, and they've taken what they believed, and they've kept few parts of it, and then the rest they just kind of threw away, and they've taken parts from Buddhism and Confucianism and mysticism, and just that it was like all the different things that you can learn about and research, and they just pulled little pieces and said, this is what I believe. And I said, okay, so let me ask you some questions. Like, I just want to understand what you're doing. And I said, how do you know if you're a good person? Let's just start at the basic level, because I think people that are trying to better themselves, that's the question they ask. Am I a good person? And his response is, well, I don't really need God, because essentially I'll do as many good deeds as I possibly can. I'll be as good of a person. I'll be morally right. Didn't even get into the idea of who defines morality, but we didn't get into that. And he says, I'm going to do all of these things, and I'm not perfect, so there's going to be some stuff that's not great. It's not going to be good. And at the end of my life, the good will hopefully outweigh the bad. So I was like, okay. All right, well, that's a good baseline, discussion. Let's start here. And I said, okay, so if you don't need God, because your goodness will win in the end. And he says, yeah. And I said, well, then let me ask you, who, if there's no God or God doesn't exist or you don't need God, who measures your scales, your good, bad scales? How do you know if what you're doing is good? And how do you know if that outweighs the bad? Like, are there good deeds that you need to do 5 to outweigh this bad deed? Like, how do you figure out what is good enough? And on top of that, who defines good and bad? And he just kind of stared at me like, huh. It was almost like a glass ceiling shattering moment where you have this view of the sky, but it's from a glass room, and then I shattered it, and then he sees the real sky, and he's like, oh man. And he kept thinking, man, is being a good enough or being a good person enough? And it really kind of messed with his brain a little bit. And I wasn't trying to. I was honestly just trying to understand where he was coming up with the theology of what he believed. And we were able to have a pretty good dialogue from that point on and kind of moving back and forth and a lot of discussions. And he's still kind of doing what he's doing. But hopefully there's some seeds that were planted from what God was trying to convey to him of, yeah, you might be a good person, but is that good enough? Because here's what the Bible says. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This has been a confusing term throughout history. It's complicated only because we get stuck on the word poor. People have used this verse to justify living with no material possessions or money, that they're supposed to be living extremely poor, in the poverty, like in the streets. Like there's people that have that extremist view because of verses like this. But was Jesus really saying, be poor? I don't think so, because he adds the word in spirit. Poor in spirit means that as a poor person hungers, we hunger for God. Our spirit hungers for God. That what we have is nothing compared to wanting God. What if you and I took a spiritual posture of acknowledging one's need for God? And we acknowledge that we are dependent on his grace, which defined means undeserved favor. So we're going to talk about that question, that concept here today. And the first thing I want to talk about is that we have to reject the pull towards legalism. Again, in the Sermon on the Mount, we're still in that. Jesus is still teaching about all things following God. And this is what he says. He says, for truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of the pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. So legalism is the idea that because you follow the rules, you become superior. Legalism doesn't have to be just defined towards church spirituality. It can be in any aspect of your life. You see it in corporate hierarchy. You see it in sports. I'm following the rules, therefore I am better than you because I've accomplished all of these things before you. Okay, I do what's right so that those that don't aren't at my level. And if we look at it specifically in the Christian context, because that's where we're here talking about the words of Jesus, it might sound a little like this. I believe in Jesus. You don't. So you're going to hell. Now, I don't think that Jesus went around like Oprah yelling at all the people in the streets, you're going to hell, you're going to hell, you're all going to hell. I don't think he said that. There were times when he discouraged others and said, that's not the way. But he never just went around telling all the people that were tripping up, that were falling, that were messing up, the woman at the well, Zacchaeus. He didn't just point at them and says, you're going to hell. He didn't do that. That wasn't his style. He was trying to get as many people as possible away from that destination. Years ago, I was at a Christian conference, and there was this guy outside of a Christian conference. I don't know if he understood what this was or he just didn't believe the same. I have no idea. But when we came out, I'm walking out, and he's holding this sign, and it said, oh man, what did it say? It said, "Liars go to hell," is what it said. And he's holding the sign, and I'm walking towards him, and he looks at me, and he points at me. He's holding the sign, he points at me, and he says, "You're going to hell." Me? I'm going to hell? I was very confused. He's looking right at me. I'm a pastor. And he says, "You are lost and you need Jesus." I wasn't sure what to do with that. It's like, how do you know? I asked him, I said, "How do you know I'm lost? How do you know that?" And he says, "I can just tell." Just tell? That was the last time I wore that shirt that day, because obviously the shirt I was wearing was telling people I was going to hell. So I threw that shirt in the trash when I got home. But he was obviously wrong. He was obviously wrong. And his assumptions were completely unfounded. But I'm sure in his mind he thought he was doing what was right. I'm sure the convictions on him made him believe that if he wanted to honor God, he had to go out into the streets holding signs, telling people that they're going to hell. Sometimes we may do or say something that we think is protecting God, but let's be clear on this, and this may be a glass-shattering moment for you right now. God does not need our protection. He's God. He can do whatever he wants. He can accomplish whatever he wants. And if there are people that are cursing his name, I promise you, God will deal with them. But Jesus was very clear about how our actions and our words need to be humble. If you're a Christian, I'm a Christian, we both need to work on being less smug. The Pharisees had an unattainable standard. They did, unattainable. Their idea was that if they followed all the rules and they did it perfectly, they could make God happy. But the last time I checked, it's impossible to be perfect because there is always something that will trip us up. There is no person out there that is completely flawless. So in that circumstance, I don't know how you would be able to say, yes, as a Pharisee, I have done it. And Jesus says two things in these verses. He says, follow the rules because they are important. But then he says, you'll never be able to follow them well enough, which is why you need me. And that's the verse that Jesus shares right here in Ephesians. This is obviously a few decades later, but he says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." We should work hard to be good examples, and we should show good character, because it is by grace, undeserved favor, that we have been saved. We did not deserve it. We did nothing to earn it. We didn't work hard enough. We didn't love hard enough. None of that stuff. It was God's grace, his favor on us is the reason why we are saved. Which means, because we received it, we should be freely giving that kind of grace to others. So the first thing is we reject legalism, and the second thing is we need to continually revisit our own behavior. Because here's Jesus, Matthew 7, says, "Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but you do not notice the log that is in your own? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when there is a log in your own?" He's painting a oxymoron picture for all of us. Obviously, a giant log in your eye is completely unignorable, right? You're not going to walk around and go, "Oh, there was a log in my eye." Basically, he's pointing out the hypocrisy, saying, you know you have problems, but you're pointing out other people's problems. And he's saying, what kind of person are you today versus yesterday? I've noticed, and I was thinking about that exact question as I was putting this message together, and I was like, man, freedoms have really changed over time. What we could do normally 30 years ago, we cannot do today. For example, driving without a seatbelt, like just throwing kids in the back of a pickup truck. You could do that 30, 40 years ago. Actually, that was probably 40 years ago, and it depends on the state. Or even smoking on an airplane. Those were behaviorally okay in that time. Today, you would get into trouble. Well, if you were caught, obviously, right? Even personally, I've noticed, as I get older, I can't eat the same things. I can't eat the way that I ate when I was a teenager. 30 years ago, I could eat whatever I wanted. I could have 4 Big Macs at 2 in the morning and not feel any effects from it. But now, as I get older, I'm noticing it's harder and harder. My boys, I have 2 teenage boys and I have a preteen boy, and they're essentially human wood chippers. They can eat and eat and eat, and it seems to be no adverse effects other than the effect on my wallet. But if I did that, if I ate the way they ate, oh my goodness, I would gain so much weight, my cholesterol would shoot through the roof. All that to say, and this is my main point for today, getting older is a bummer. Obviously, that's not the main point, but in my heart, I feel that is, it's such a bummer, right? Getting older is like, sometimes it's just such a bummer. But I personally continually revisit my own habits because I want to make sure that I am improving and I'm course correcting behaviors that need to be corrected. I had lunch with a friend quite a few years back, and we were just talking about life, and I said, so how are things going? And she just said, James, it's not great. Man, work's not going well. I'm really lonely. I'm just struggling with the idea of community and finding depth within friendships, and I just feel distant from everyone, God, everything. I just don't feel like there's really any really semblance of something that makes me belong. And as they're talking, I kind of stopped and I said, hey, I know the problem. And they were like, huh? And I said, you just need to get your butt into church. That's it, right there. You stop going to church. You stop connecting with God and other people. That's why you feel this way. And I didn't say it in a mean way. I said it in what I thought was a loving way. And they just looked at me with, you could see a visible hurt. And what proceeded to come out of her mouth at that moment was she just said, well, I'm sharing with you where I'm struggling, and you're telling me that it's all my fault and the way to fix it is to go to church. I just needed you to be a friend, James, just to listen and encourage me. And maybe you could have encouraged me with that eventually, but you didn't spend hardly any time listening. And she's right. It was maybe 30 seconds after, or maybe a minute after she shared all this, I just blurted this out. And I felt terrible after that interaction. I felt really bad because I realized that the things that I said, my own behavior, hurt her chances of reconnecting with God. And that day, I vowed I don't want to ever be the reason that someone does not want to experience God because of my behavior, because of what I said is the reason why they don't want to be in communion with God. And I made a course correction that day. Unfortunately, I had to learn the hard way, but I did course correct, and I did try my best to be as humble as possible and to humble myself before people in moments like that. And I believe spiritually, Jesus is calling us to do the same, especially based off of this verse. He's saying, what's tripping you up? Don't worry about what other people are doing. You're more concerned about them, and you're not doing what you need to do, and the behavior that you need to fix. So what are you doing? Yours is worse. And Jesus is pointing that out to these people, and he's pointed that out to me, and he's pointing that out to you, that we need to understand that we have to constantly be course correcting our behavior so that we reflect who Jesus is. The third thing that we can do is embrace transformation over image management. Now that may seem like a long mouthful sentence, and it was hard for me to say for a second, but I'll get to it in a second. If we keep reading in Matthew, verse 13, it says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But the gate, let me try that again. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few will find it. When I say embrace transformation over image management, typically, and again, typically, there are moments where maybe you feel more vulnerable and transparent, and you don't do this, but typically, you and I try not to make ourselves look bad. We don't like our pictures to look bad. We don't want statements out there that puts us in a negative light. And sometimes we'll do whatever we can to make sure those kinds of descriptions aren't known. Social media, the low-hanging fruit. Rarely do you see someone put a pic or a caption that is negative about themselves. They don't put a picture of themselves waking up in the morning and saying, look at how ugly I am. That's just, you don't see that. And when you see instances of vulnerability, it's almost shocking because it's not normally on there. Let me give you a very easy example. This is notorious in social media and in Hollywood. Here's a picture of Blake Lively. She's the lady on the left, and of course the man on her right, his name is Ryan Reynolds. They are both A-list Hollywood stars. She is known for her beauty and known for her marriage to Ryan Reynolds. But of all the posts that she has put on her social media and all the posts that Ryan has put on social media, one of their most viral ones is not something like this, like, wow, we clean up well, which, you know, a lot of people do that before date night, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing wrong with that. But this is not the most viral. The most viral is this one. And people responded to this real moment. They were like, oh, this is so amazing. Oh man, you were just like the rest of us. And it's true. Who hasn't had one of those pictures where 1, 2, and you have your eyes closed, or you're sneezing, or you have a funny look on your face? But we never post those. And the fact that they posted it, and this was Ryan actually posting it and saying happy birthday to his wife and saying, I love you so much. And it's hilarious because there was realness there. I think we all want to belong somewhere. And there's a very real fear in all of us that somehow we might not be good enough to belong. Whether it's shame or guilt or low self-esteem, we oftentimes will have barriers to experiencing that fullness. Here in Matthew, Jesus gives us a pathway. One that isn't easy, but leads to freedom. Let me show you a visual to kind of help paint the picture of what I mean by this. So typically, we have ourselves, right? And I'm gonna put ourselves here. I'll just do a fun little stick figure. Okay, we have ourselves, and we have our own view of ourself. And one of the things that we believe, or multiple things that we might believe, is we have insecurities. So we might have maybe medium self-image, but we'll have self-image. Sorry, my handwriting's so bad, but I'm trying not to lean over here. We have self-image, we have view of self, right? That's the same thing. We have insecurities. We have, all these things. Like we might even have some shame and guilt and all those other things. And we have this view, and we're not sure how much of this view we can express or we can show. And to top it off, there's this other view, and this view is of the world, right? You have the world. Let's just pretend that's, the world right there, okay? And we have this view of the world, and the view of the world says success looks a certain way. Success looks a certain way. Your image needs to be a certain way. You need certain things like you need certain items. We talked about it last week, security. And you have all of these different things that the world defines that you need. And then this stuff gets translated to us, and we start looking up, and we go, huh. And we look up, and we're like, huh. I'm not as successful as I want to be. My image is not what I think a successful person looks like. And my security, oh man, I don't have enough. And so then it creates this even worse self-image, and the self-image becomes bigger, and the shame becomes bigger, and our view of self becomes bigger, and our insecurity obviously gets bigger and bigger, and it almost becomes like rocks getting ready to crush us. But Jesus says that's because you're looking at the worldview. There's another path. And he describes it, and he says it's narrow, but what if we looked at how God views us, and there's God on this side, right? God is on this side, and he says, I know you, you're known. And he says that you're amazing, which is why I gave you Jesus. And he says, yourself is perfect because I created you. And he has all these views, and he says, if you want to know what that feels like, just walk across. It's a different pathway. It's a little bit more narrow. See, the thing with this one is, this is a huge road right here. Jesus' words, not mine. This road is big. The road to destruction, to world, to self-insecurity, that's a huge pathway. And God says, no, 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 there's another way. This one's a little bit more narrow. This one's going to require a little bit more work. But guess what? It's going to be worth it. And he invites us. And because of grace, like he didn't just build a pathway, he built a bridge for us. He created a bridge that said, you know what? You don't ever have to worry. Again, just come this way. And this narrow path leads to a healthier view of ourself. But we struggle with this because this is the easy. Oh, you don't have enough? Work harder, make more, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have a good view of self? Change everything about yourself. You want more security or success? Then you change the way that you work. You put in an extra 20 hours a week, whatever it is. And we have this pathway, and this pathway says, fix it yourself. Where God says, you can't fix it yourself, but I can fix it. And if you walk this way, you'll be transformed. And not only will you be transformed, because now you are solid, you are with me, unmoving, always open, unchanging, unwilling to leave you. I will show you what true transparency looks like. Why not go with this option? Why continue to do this? This is the question that I ask myself all the time, because even as a pastor, I struggle with these things as well too. Am I good enough as a pastor? Is my image one that brings other people to Christ? Am I as good as the other pastors out there? I compare all the time. It's when I go here that I feel the most fullness. And here's how we do it. We do it because we make a personal relationship for our spiritual foundation. Jesus' words here says, many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended and the floods came. And the winds blew and beat on his house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. A personal relationship with Jesus. He lays it out for everyone. On that rock, Jesus, when we build on that, we are given new life. And because it's given to us, grace, we can't brag about it. We didn't earn it. It was a gift. So how do you define that relationship? What does it look like? Well, it means first, you believe in Jesus. That's the bottom baseline. He is the Son of God. By believing that he died and rose again, we have life. That is basic salvation 101. First step. From there, life change. We shift our life away from here towards God, allowing God to be the center, the rock that we build on, the bridge that we walk over. And when we do that, we experience more freedom to be transparent and to be transformed. The real question is your life a reflection of transformation and transparency? Or do we focus on the material and the outer? Where do you need to focus your life and shift your life? For me, I am constantly having to go back and forth and moving away from here and towards God. And then I'll find moments where I'm like, oh, but security. And then I have to move my way back. And then I'll come back. Oh, I'm not good enough. And then I have to move my way back. And I'm constantly doing that, which means probably you have to as well too. But where do you need to shift and focus your life? I've learned that the longer you wait to do it, the harder it is. So my encouragement to you as I finish out in prayer is I want you to just take a moment and reflect. And I want you to take an inventory of the areas that you're struggling with, because your view is based off of the world says you need and not based off of what God says you are. And I want you to just think about a couple of those and pray over those. And just commit to God, saying, God, I want to change this about me today. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, we're grateful for just the fact that you were willing to build a bridge to us when we didn't deserve it, Father, the undeserving favor, grace that you gave us. And I just pray in this moment that we don't take that as some kitschy gift that we can just throw in the closet, but God, that we treat it as precious and valuable. Help us, Father, to shift away from the world and to focus more on you. And I ask for this, God, in Jesus' name, amen. Man, I hope you experience that freedom that comes with knowing God and giving more of yourself to God. And I hope you experience that today. If you have any further questions, obviously I'm always available. Shoot a message in the comments. Any of those things work as well too, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Appreciate you guys, and I'll talk to you next time.